Divorce Periscope. My name's Matt Pilisher, and I'm an attorney and a mediator with the Alpha Center for Divorce Mediation. And we have with us tonight Cindy Thiers, who is a therapist, and we're going to be talking about children and divorce. So, children and how they deal with divorce before, during, and after. And I'm going to ask Cindy some questions, and hopefully we have some interested audience members who want to share comments and questions. And we have another Matt here behind the camera who's going to be taking notes. We can't see your questions or comments, but he's going to be writing them down. And so, feel free to ask us anything related to the topic of children and divorce. So let me get started by, let me read your introduction, and I'm also going to say something about Alpha Center for Divorce Mediation. We're based in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, but we do work all over southeastern Pennsylvania, and we do divorce mediation. We pioneered divorce mediation in this part of the country, and we have a unique 7-step program that takes couples through divorce from start to finish and allows them to have total control over the decisions and how they're doing divorce. It allows them to keep the impact on the kids as little as possible, which we can talk about a little bit. And it greatly reduces the costs if you're doing mediation as opposed to the traditional litigation route. So we're very conscious of trying to keep our divorces child-centered in the way that we want to think of having as little trauma on the kids as possible. And Cindy is one of our parenting therapists that we work with, who does parenting mediations to help our clients talk about custody and a co-parenting plan and agreement for starting the basis of the rest of their lives together as parents, because even though their relationship is changing, they will always be parents. So I've been an attorney mediator at Alpha for about 2 years, and I'm happy to be the host of this broadcast, which we're going to be doing the first and third Wednesday evenings of every month, and sort of swapping different topics. So keep a lookout on our Twitter feed, or go to alpha-divorce.com to learn more, and you can see the different topics that are coming up for the different Divorce Periscope broadcasts. So, thank you. With that, let me introduce you, Cindy.
Okay.
So, Cindy Thiers has been in the field of counseling psychology for 14 years. She has a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Westchester University and a Master of Arts in Clinical Counseling Psychology from LaSalle University. And she's a licensed professional counselor. Cindy's background encompasses the community mental health system, crisis intervention, drug and alcohol treatment and assessment, group, individual, and family therapy. She has experience working with children, couples, addictions, eating disorders, clients with a history of physical, emotional, and sexual trauma, and forensic psychology. Cindy works at outpatient therapist, as an outpatient
That's
therapist,
right, yeah.
and forensic evaluator at the Lenape Valley Foundation. In addition, she has a private practice in Doylestown working with clients and their families on a variety of issues, and social work at Horsham Clinic in Ambler, PA. And as I said, she does parenting mediations for us at Alpha Center and does a great job. So thank you for being here. Do you want to add
My
anything to
No.
your bio? Okay.
No. I've been doing the parenting mediations for 6 years with Alpha.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember how you found out about Alpha Center?
I do. So my supervisor, who was at my internship about 14 years ago now, he called me up and asked if I wanted to work with him with Alpha. So he's the supervisor.
Oh, okay.
Rab Brooks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool. So, I'll also say a lot of us at Alpha have experience personally with divorce ourselves. And we, sitting here, have both been divorced, so we know what it's like sitting in the chair going through just making those decisions, and it can be very difficult. So let's start the conversation. Sure. Why don't we talk about sort of before the divorce is going on,
Mm-hmm.
as problems are arising between you and your spouse, maybe you haven't made the decision to be separated or divorced yet. How do you think, I was thinking about how do you handle the kids seeing you argue, how you're relating to your spouse and wanting to, model for them the best behavior, but you're not getting along with your spouse at that point.
Sure.
And then we'll go into divorce.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Yeah.
so one of the things that's important is to keep the children out of any disputes or any disagreements that you and your spouse are having, regardless if you've made that decision to separate or divorce.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, talking to the children about what you're planning to do, you should only do once you've made the decision.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a situation where you decide to stay together and work things out, being honest with them age appropriately with what's going on, and then talking to your spouse about the kids noticing what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to reduce any disagreements in front of them would be important.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you've made the decision to divorce, then it would be important to talk to the other parent about how to approach the issue with them. Again, being as honest as possible, age appropriate.
And so, do you generally suggest that couples have a plan together to sit down as a family and talk together? Or is it ever
Absolutely.
appropriate for just the mother or just the father or just one spouse to sit down and talk to the kids?
Well, one of the things about the mediation process, which is a beautiful thing, is that parents come together and they're making a plan for their family.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, as you said earlier, even though they're divorcing, they're still a family, defined differently. And that's often what I'll tell parents. You're still a family, it's just defined differently. And that's also what you can tell your kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, so the importance in communication would be talking to the other parent and then deciding, how to approach the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would suggest, if at all possible, talking to the children together,
Mm-hmm.
but coming up with a script beforehand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you think it's helpful for people to talk to a therapist to get advice for how to do that?
I think so. I mean, I think there's different situations, for everything. And, people will ask, well, given my symptoms or given what's going on, how often should I see a therapist? Should I see a therapist? And that's all very personal.
Mm-hmm.
So a therapist can be helpful as a guide,
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be both parents. It could be one parent.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think it's definitely personal preference, and, trying to figure out, how to navigate finding a therapist can be difficult too.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be a question later. I don't know if you want to talk about that now, but like, how do people find a good therapist? I mean, do you have any suggestions or tips for people? I guess, we're talking about in the divorce context, and we're talking about children and divorce, but in general, people that are going through divorce often should be seeing, counselors or therapists to help with their own emotions or the family dynamic. And what do you think is the best way to be looking for the therapist for you?
Sure. So anytime you're looking for a therapist, it's important. So if it's in relation to a family situation, you want to look for a therapist with experience working with families.
Mm-hmm.
So in Pennsylvania, that we have licensed marriage and family therapists.
Mm-hmm.
So LMFT would be the initials after the person's name.
Mm-hmm.
And they have experience. That's what their particular area of study is families.
Mm-hmm.
And the dynamics between families.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you're going to go with someone with the degree that I have in the license, which would be a licensed professional counselor, you want to make sure that they have experience in family counseling or whatever issues are presenting at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then to me, the most important thing in a therapeutic relationship is the actual relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So interviewing,
Right.
Don't be afraid to interview and talk to the therapist that you're interested in seeing. 15-minute phone call can make a big difference.
Mm-hmm. And if you're in our area, like the greater Philadelphia area, we have a really good resource directory through alpharesourcecenter.com that has lists of therapists like Cindy that we've met, that we have heard good things about, that you can check out. So let's see. How do you successfully parent kids once you're no longer living in the same house? So, you are either separated or divorced, and one of you has moved out, and it can be really hard for parents who are now suddenly not spending all of the home time with their kids, but it's half time, or it's 60% of the time, or it's 30% of the time. But on top of that, you have to have open communication with your maybe estranged spouse or your ex-spouse. So, what are some of the dynamics there to help you, navigate that?
Yeah. So one of the things that, is really good about the parenting mediations. So when we're writing up the agreement, one of the things that we talk about is that they're going to work together, the parents, and that if there's disagreements in parenting, that when we talk about different homes, so you talk about the custodial parent, so the parent who has the children at the time, and then the non-custodial parent, so the parent who obviously does not have the children at the time. So if the children are with the one parent, the custodial parent, if there's anything that happens there, anything, disagreements, things like that, or punishments, then the non-custodial parent to be informed, and then to carry out, whatever the consistency, basically.
Right. Like if there was a punishment for taking away the phone or something that you want the other parent to follow through.
Sure.
Yeah.
And of course talk about that beforehand, which can be difficult in divorce, because oftentimes the reason people are getting divorced is because they aren't communicating well.
Right.
Or at all, for that matter. So oftentimes when parents will ask about that, I'll say, well, you can communicate nowadays through text, through email. There's many other means. And if it's difficult to talk to the other parent, especially at the beginning, to avoid those kind of contentious conversations, like over the phone or in person, and to try not to have not have any of those conversations in front of your children. So kind of having a guideline set up ahead of time, so that if and when those occasions arise, they have a guideline for how they're going to resolve issues.
And do you suggest that is, I know in mediation, we're going for a parenting agreement that is a written set guideline. Do you suggest that's that people should always have a written guideline?
It helps.
Yeah.
It helps with any disputes, so that if it's in writing and then you can reference back to it, is that practical? Probably not.
Yeah.
But at least talking about it ahead of time, and so one of the things in redefining a family after divorce is, establishing the fact that you're both still equal parents.
Right.
And that you're not partners, romantic partners, or partners in a relationship, except for with your children. So you're parenting partners, essentially. So how can you do that effectively would be the question for parents to ask. So they could go to a therapist, would be one way to talk about those issues.
And when do people do that parenting plan? I guess you could do it at a number of times. Some people maybe don't do it during divorce because it's so chaotic and people are focused on getting that done. In our process and in a lot of mediations, you're handling that as a part of it and hopefully keeping that as one piece where it's just thinking about the best interests of the kids, and then the other finances and stuff is separate. But can people do it even after they're divorced? Sure. Come back together and figure out what are the
guidelines? Absolutely. And that's part of the parenting agreement as well, is that the parents would agree that they would, if there is a conflict that arises, that they would first seek mutually agreed upon counseling. Then they would seek mediation, and last resort would be litigation. So the goal, as you said earlier, is to keep parents out of litigation, because divorce is traumatic. It's a traumatic event for children. It's a traumatic event for the parents.
What I don't know how much you've worked in litigation with divorce. Can you talk at all about what that looks like in terms of the kids' involvement? Do you have experience in that?
A little bit of personal, and
okay.
Absolutely. Sometimes and sometimes I do have to testify in court for my clients, my outpatient clients, for a custody situation. So it's ugly.
Yeah.
The kids often are in the middle and they're torn apart, because kids love both of their parents regardless. That's just the bottom line. So they don't want to hear their parents fighting. They don't want to hear disputes.
And especially over them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so, when I see kids come into my office for treatment, it's often, when after a divorce, it's often because the parents aren't able to get along.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay to not get along with the other parent, just
Mm-hmm.
keeping that out of the sight of the children.
Right.
Litigation, like you said, brings it in the forefront for everybody.
Mm-hmm. So I think I was reading somewhere online in preparation for this, and that great rule, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all,
Mm-hmm.
maybe applies when you're talking to your kids about your ex-spouse.
Sure. Yeah. And again, in the parenting agreements that we write at Alpha, is that both parents are agreeing not to participate in any negativity about the other parent. And encouraging, what's really important is encouraging the child, again, age appropriate. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you can't encourage a 2-year-old to talk to their other parent about how they feel.
Right.
But when age appropriate, if the child's coming to you and saying, Mom did this or Dad did this, encouraging them to talk directly to the other parent. So that not only encourages them to have good communication skills,
Mm-hmm.
because they're learning how to handle disputes effectively with that person,
Mm-hmm.
it's also a good model for them going forward in their lives,
Right.
in relationships.
Mm-hmm. If you're just tuning in, we're talking about children and divorce. And we have Cindy here, who is a licensed professional counselor. I was just going to say therapist, but I wanted to get it just right. And I am a licensed attorney. But I do mediation. So we deal a lot with trying to protect children through the divorce process. So that's what we're talking about. We were throwing out this term age appropriate, and maybe people don't exactly understand that. Well, can you just explain that for?
Well, so for example, keeping in mind developmental stages for children. So specifically with communication, like I said, so a 2-year-old doesn't have words for many things, let alone to say how they feel. But, once they get to, 3, 4, 5, they have more words that they can use. So one of the things that's important, again, if your partner's in parenting, you're not married, but your partner's in parenting, is teaching your kids how to deal with conflicts in a healthy way. So age appropriate means, so if they're 5, they may not go into, I feel statements, like I feel hurt when you yell. But you could say, if your child comes to you and says, I don't like when daddy yells, or I don't like when mommy, puts me to bed at 8 o'clock, okay, well, I understand, so talk to your mom or talk to your dad about that when you see them next. So, then if you look at like a teenager, that's a whole other.
Right, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Like how much do we have a
just
question?
Have someone who come in asked if you're lawyers.
Oh,
so if you want to recap that real quick.
So I'm an attorney, and I work in family law in divorce, and I only do divorce mediation. So it's a unique process where you're helping couples work together to go through a divorce. And Cindy is a therapist, so she works with kids through the divorce process. In this context is what we're talking about. But going back to the age appropriate, so yeah, that makes sense. A teenager is going to need a lot more details about what divorce will look like. Sure. Am I right?
Sure.
So age appropriate for a teenager versus a 5-year-old is going to look very different.
It'll look different.
You share.
The one thing that remains the same, however, is that all children will internalize a divorce as it's their fault. So regardless of age, parents have to keep that in mind. So reminding your children that what's happened is a relationship issue. Has nothing to do with the child themselves.
Can you say that again? Because I think it's really important.
Yes.
How all children will.
Well, so all children will internalize divorce as if it's their fault. Again, all children are egocentric, meaning they see the world through their own eyes, and almost as if they can affect relationships and things that happen in their lives. So that for parents to keep that in mind and to remind their children that it's not their fault, that parents get divorced for adult reasons that have nothing to do with their child.
And always saying that, like, even though my relationship with mommy is changing, we will always be your parents. We will always be a family. Right. We will always love you.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, very important.
let's see. How do you have communication with the other parent when there are contentious feelings regarding the marital relationship? You want to talk a little bit more about that?
So when I meet with couples within the mediation setting, and I start to get the feeling that there's unresolved issues within their relationship, and things start to escalate, either they yell or they seem angry, then I often will suggest using some kind of communication in writing. So, like I said earlier, whether it's like a text message, which can be very effective in those situations, or email, and always reminding parents to just stick with the facts, leave the feelings out of it.
So in some cases, it's finding some alternative form of communication to sort of keep you cool, and maybe when you're writing it, you get to see what you've put down on paper.
Yeah, and especially if it's anything in writing, always read it twice before you send it,
right?
Just to make sure that what you're saying, you're getting across. You know that's exactly what you're trying to say, and leaving out your feelings about the other person, and just focusing on the best interest of the children.
You wrote about something, parenting out of guilt. What does that mean?
Well, I see that actually often, and in many different circumstances. But within the framework of divorce, I'll often see parents. I mean, of course, we as parents feel guilty when our kids' lives don't go the way that we planned, and we feel like, just as kids feel like they did something wrong, we feel like we can fix whatever it is. So if there's a divorce, we want to try to fix that pain or take that pain away. So I'll see parents who will often indulge their children. So 10-year-olds getting iPhones because mom or dad feels guilty, whether it's they feel guilty because they're not spending as much time, or they have to work more, so they can't attend games or practices like they used to. And so they overindulge their children, either in material things, and or don't hold them accountable for their behaviors or things that they might have while they were divorced. So that can be a very confusing message to children. And it can also, give that message that, well, I can do something wrong, but I'm still going to get something out of it because my parents, they know that their parents feel guilty, regardless of the age. So what's important is to stay, a strong parent and do exactly what you would have done regardless if you were divorced or not. So.
And I imagine that when divorce is happening and kids are impacted, some of how that comes out is behavioral problems with the kids acting out. And that could happen not even just at home, but at school maybe, that it would pop out in terms of feeling sad or anxious or angry.
Yeah, and what I'll say, because parents will often ask that when we're doing the mediation, like, how do I know when my son or daughter or my children are struggling? So I kind of equate it to, like, the development of a baby. So from birth to 1 year, for example, those are the hardest years. So the first 3 months.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, as you know, having a
I just
baby,
adopted, so 3-month-old.
Yeah, so those first 3 months are very difficult, and that's the adjustment period. So, you don't know what's happening. You don't even know if you're up in the night or the day, right? So when you're going through a divorce, it's the same thing. Everything feels like chaotic. Nobody knows what's up, what's down, who's where, and then trying to get used to schedules. Then you figure with a baby, between 3 and 6 months, they're a little more human. They start to kind of tell the difference between night and day. They're sleeping better. You're sleeping better. So by 6 months, that baby they're pretty good. I mean, they're still going to get up. They're still going to have difficulty. And same with people. So by the time you get to 6 months after the divorce, so
you're starting to
adjust.
Reality is setting in. Yeah.
So it's like an adjustment period. So, 3 months, after 3 months, everybody should kind of be settling into their schedule. I mean, that doesn't mean that there's never going to be a sad day or an anxious day, but by 6 months, there should be pretty much a groove going on, and you shouldn't see too much behavioral issues. If you do see behavioral issues after that time, then that's what you want to talk to either your pediatrician or talk to a therapist about what you're seeing.
And it's probably much harder to deal with behavioral issues when you're passing off a child, maybe that's not the right word, but the child is moving from household to household, your lives are already crazy, and you're having to like really focus on communication with your ex-spouse and have a very developed plan about a new behavioral problem that's developing.
Yeah, it's very difficult and challenging. And so sometimes what I'll see is parents will say, well, it happens at her house, but not at my house. Or it happens at his house, but, I don't see those behaviors here. And then sometimes they'll say, well, we see it here, there, and like you said, school or in sports. So as a therapist, what I'm looking for is, where the behavior is happening. So if it's happening in all areas of their life, then something's going on internally with the child everywhere they are. But if it's only happening in one place, then we need to look at what's happening at that place.
And why.
Sure.
Yeah.
And being fair about that. So not placing blame, it could just be simply, like an adjustment situation.
What about older or fully grown kids going through divorce? Because I do divorces with couples of all ages, and a lot of them have grown kids, and I will always, although we're not going to do a custody plan or child support, I'll always bring into the conversation, like, what's your relationship like? Have you talked to your kids about this? And your kids will still be impacted by this in some way. How do you think that
over
changes?
18, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe that's not. I don't know if
that's a good question
experience.
because, you figure once you're 18, you're pretty secure. Like, my parents are going to be together forever.
Right.
That's kind of the assumption. And so for parents to split up then, I think that can be that can rock somebody's world, and maybe even some disbelief. Like maybe what I thought about their marriage wasn't real, or maybe, you know what I mean? So they might start questioning their belief system about the world and relationships.
Yeah. That's what, I have a very good friend from college whose parents we thought had the ideal relationship, and then that happened after college. And it was, I think you often see this, all the kids have left the home, they're empty nesters, and we're seeing older couples having more time together. Sometimes they retire, and suddenly they're spending all their waking hours together, and you remember, or it's a new experience. And I could imagine that when you think, oh, they had the perfect relationship, and then it's like that broke too, or it wasn't perfect like I thought that it could.
It'd certainly be an impact, yeah. And I think the other part too is people live longer now.
Yeah.
So, where you're seeing, people might, be 50, 55, and they're getting divorced, they could have a whole second life, really. And so for those children, I think it's important, again, for parents to be honest at that point, and really say, have an honest conversation about, whatever it is that adult child now is feeling, So, and maybe that will help them clarify things. Like maybe mom and dad will say, no, it wasn't always perfect. We did this for you guys. Or maybe they'll say, yeah, it was great, but we just don't have anything in common, So getting those answers are so important,
Yeah. So going through the divorce process can look very different. And again, we're doing this broadcast out of Alpha Center for Divorce Mediation. So we do only mediation, and it's a way to do a more amicable divorce, keep the control with the couple together making the decisions, and child-centered, trying to make sure the children are impacted as little as possible. Compare that to a litigated divorce, as we touched on a little bit earlier, that can last years.
Absolutely.
And some of our divorces may go as fast as, in some cases 3 months, usually 5 months is the quickest in Pennsylvania. I imagine that limbo process is best to go as quick as possible, so that you make the right decisions, but for the kids too, that it's not that instability for a long time. Is
sure.
That right?
Yeah, and I think too the other part is the financial piece. I mean, it's hard enough to have a 2-parent household where both parents are working and make ends meet, let alone trying to have 2 homes with 1 parent as a single parent. And then the amount of money that goes into litigation, especially if it goes on for years and you're having multiple courtroom, you're going to the court a lot, then that can be astronomical and impact the family for a really long time, So I think the financial impact and then the emotional impact. I mean, like you said, being in limbo is one of the worst places you can be because you just don't know, like neither one foot's one way, one foot's the other way. You're not on like stable ground.
Right.
So the kids feel that. The kids feel everything. And you figure like if you think about your life and growing up, like all of us, what we've created is what we've seen modeled for us. So what our parents said doesn't, not so much, but what we saw is what we'll end up doing. And that's often what I'll say to parents is what you do means more than what you say, so keeping that in mind. So if they see that going on and they see this contentious relationship at all, but especially for significant periods, what I then see as a therapist is kids or adult children coming in and they don't know how to have relationships. Especially a romantic relationship because that wasn't modeled for them. So if you have a couple where, again, as best as possible, it's not, you're divorcing, so obviously there's a reason.
Yeah.
But if you can keep the framework as that's going to be my partner in parenting and that's it, and try to get through that part with the kids, like then I see less impact on the child. And actually, kids have divorced from parents who get along as much as possible and try to keep consistency and boundaries and consistent punishments. They can adjust just as well as children who are in families that don't divorce, so intact families.
What about, I'm thinking about that transition still and that limbo period, and a lot of times you don't know how you're dividing the finances. It's not finalized for sure for at least 5 months, and in some cases a year, 2 years. And so that means that usually one person is living in what might be temporary housing and trying to create a new home and environment for kids in a place that doesn't feel great to them. And I'm thinking about, some of my clients where the parents feel less confident that their kids want to spend time with them. And it's very sad to watch. And what I've tried to do is just remind them, like, the kids love you, they want to be with you, and as long as it's a safe environment and you're spending time with them, that's kind of what's important. But any advice for that people that are going through, like, they're in this limbo period, they're a little bit not sure of their own home, and they're having kids come and spend time with them in a place that they feel like is not as great as the other parents' home?
Well, I think there's 2 things. I think one is, I think it's, so whichever parent that is, that, say one parent keeps the home, the other parent's in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. So the kids are not used to that space and it's, feels weird. Then the parent who has stayed in the home, remained in the home, I think it's important for them, regardless of how they feel about the other parent, to encourage the children to go have fun. Like, you're going to have a great time at mom's house. You guys can watch movies, you can... you guys can have a sleepover. You can make forts if they're young enough.
Right.
But definitely encouraging that relationship, regardless. And the other thing that we forget, I think, about kids, and I mean us as adults, but kids are so resilient. I mean, their ability to bounce back is amazing. And so we as parents try to put bubble wrap around them because we don't want them to get hurt, but not realizing that anytime any of us grow. It's out of something difficult, so keeping that in mind. So if you can take, a difficult time like a divorce and teach your children how to grow from that and to look at the positives in both situations. So you have mom's house, which is great. You might not have your own room, but you have her and you have your siblings, like looking at those things. And then you get to come back to my house and then you have your room and, but making sure that your children respect the other parent, regardless of their financial status, your feelings about them, because I think that goes a long way.
That's really good advice. we're getting towards the end of the questions that I had here, but one of the last ones I had that is interesting is when we're doing a mediation and we have someone like you sit and do a parenting mediation where they're going to talk with the couple and go through and do the guidelines for a co-parenting agreement and how are they doing custody and when's drop off and pick up and what do holidays look like and all of that. Maybe we should have you explain all that too. We have a plan, and I usually tell my clients, you're going to try and stick to this plan, but one of you is going to screw up at some point. And you need to have a lot of empathy. If you can, you need to have empathy for yourself and for the other person. And you're going to do your best. And assuming, you know, there's enough goodwill preserved between the two of them, like a lot of our clients, I try and tell them, you know, you need to be able to work through if you screw up. And how do you deal with that when it's in relation to a co-parenting agreement? You know, the dad slips up and introduces the kids to a new girlfriend before he was supposed to is common. And how do you rebuild that trust with mom as co-parents together? You know, I mean.
Yeah, so you're saying the common thing that you see is that, especially within new relationships?
Well, that was just an example. But if you screw up.
Meaning like they agreed to meet after a certain period and they meet before. Yeah. So dealing with that distrust, I guess, is kind of what it is.
With the other
with the other parent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a tough.
I mean, maybe that's a suggestion where you may want to go to counseling to talk about the family relationship. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, encouraging honesty. You know, so if one parent screwed up, I mean, I think sometimes just admitting that you screwed up can be enough. And, you know, none of us are perfect. So, you know, with kids, it's kind of like, you know, they need to see it's okay to make mistakes. And then it's also okay to try to rectify it. So, you know, depending on the situation, a new relationship can be complicated if, what I usually say to parents is if you're in a situation where you're introducing a child to a new relationship, the court's not going to micromanage your relationships, you know, unless it's some extreme issue. But what you want to think about is, you know, when you have your kids meet, you know, your new partner, and then they come home and tell the other parent, and that parent's like, you can just see the look in their face, like, oh, okay, great, you know. So how do you, like, you know, to mitigate that? So it's just important to keep that communication going as much as possible. So if the person realizes they screwed up, admitting it would be the first thing.
That would probably go a long way, because what often I hear is that they find out from the kids. Right. So maybe
that's what you don't.
You want to say something before the kids say something.
Yeah, you never want your kids to be the messenger.
Right.
I mean.
Yeah, talk about that, because that's really important.
Well, it's very common. I'll see, you know, parents, you know, and even, you know, in my personal life where I'll see, you know, tell your dad this or tell, and just imagine being a kid and what that would feel like. I mean, that can't feel very good, you know, because you can't. I mean, as an adult, you can't gauge someone's reaction sometimes. So as a child, how are you going to gauge the reaction? And no kids want to disappoint their parents. So keeping your kids out of the middle of any disagreements or being the messenger of anything. So, you know, is it okay to hand them, like, you know, an envelope and say, you know, tell mom I gave you the check for book fair? Sure, that's okay. You might want to follow up with a text message saying, I gave Johnny the book fair money. Yeah. You know, so, but just making sure that you and the other parent communicate as much as possible, you know, even if it's painful, because that's an adult decision, not a child's decision. So,
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So maybe lastly, we could talk through what developing a co-parenting plan during divorce looks like. Like, what are typically through our mediations, let's say through Alpha Center for Divorce Mediation, what is it that you, as the parenting therapist, will go through the topics that you talk about in the parenting mediation with the couple to begin writing the co-parenting agreement?
Well, so first and foremost, I give couples a lot of credit for coming together into a mediation. because that way they are still putting their family in the forefront, even though they're deciding not to continue with the relationship. So I think that is something that needs to be said. And then I also tell them that by doing the parenting agreement here, as opposed to going into court, you have a lot more control over what you say, you know, and how it's written. And that, you know, you're doing this, you know, so that your kids know how much that you love them, you know, which I think goes a long way. And parents can often then see, wow, like we really are good parents, even if we're not good, you know, husband, wife, or partner or whatever. So, so that's usually how I'll start out. And then we'll talk about legal custody and what that means. So legal custody would be the decision-making processes for the children. And then talking about physical custody, which could be either be a primary or partial, and then a shared custody, which
50-50
or 60-40, I think also, right, in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I mean, anything that's different than 50-50, we would usually say there's a primary
and then
custodian.
Okay. And then kind of working out that framework, you know, and then also letting parents know, like, this is your framework. This is what you're going to work within. You know, they can kind of maneuver how they feel comfortable within that, but knowing that that's their fallback, so that if they ever do, you know, hopefully not, but end up in litigation, the court will go by what's written on the paper. So just keeping that in mind. So making sure they're comfortable with that framework. And then also, you know, reminding them that what's most important is that your children are able to see both of you as much as possible and are free to love both of you as much as possible. So, you know, so figuring out a plan that works. And again, talking about developmentally. So if you have a young child, you know, let's say prior to age 5, you want to make sure that the time between seeing each of their parents is not a long time, right? So you don't...
So it might not be a week on, a week off.
Probably not, unless logistically, like, so some parents, you know, I've had doctors or, you know, police officers where they may be on duty or, you know, on call or have a shift for that length of time. But other than that, well, then that being said, if that's the case, then trying to have visitation, you know, so meaning that parent gets to visit with the child, even if it's just a short period of time, because kids at that age, once you're gone, they think you're gone. They don't realize that you're not, like, you'll be back, you know what I mean? So trying to keep that time period as short as possible without it going bouncing back and forth. Like every other day might be too much for anybody. You know?
But 2-2-3 is typical. And,
Okay. So, and I also remind parents too, because oftentimes when they're writing the agreements, you know, when we look at the weekends, for example, parents will think, okay, well, I'll have the kids every weekend and then you can have them during the week. And I remind them too that the other important thing is that they need a life too. You know, that having your kids all the time and then working off time isn't healthy either. So keeping that balance. So, you know, those are the things that we'll talk about. And often.
You'll go through a calendar year and look at, like, because sometimes people just don't think about, like, oh, there's it's going to look different in the summer, or the holidays that pop up, or typically we've done Christmas or Hanukkah in this way, so how are we going to think through? Is it overwhelming for people to sit down and try and think through all of this stuff?
I think sometimes. I think the list that we give them of all the holidays, which includes, you know, a lot of our, you know, maybe not major holidays, but reminding them once their children are school age, that those will be days off from school, which is also why we include them. Right. Because if one parent, let's say, has every Monday, they're going to get a lot of those holidays. So that's a lot of time off from work. Yeah. Right. You know, so just reminding them those things. So if you don't specify those, then it will go by the regular parenting schedule, and then that parent will be responsible for the children, for example, you know. Then we look at, like, say, Memorial Day, Labor Day, or any of those that turn into long weekends, you know. So do we define them by the weekend? Do we define them by the day? And and again, when you're doing a mediation, you have way more control over how you want that to be written, as opposed to, okay, you get odd years, I get even years, you know, which you know, can feel like you don't really have a choice in that. So talking to them about what's their most important holiday, you know.
I think typically also the mediation process is teaching the parents to deal with disputes in a way that is more amicable, working through, not through advocates like attorneys speaking for them, but actually finding their own voice, collaborating, and figuring out how to talk with your spouse or your ex-spouse, even under really emotionally stressful circumstances.
Sure.
So hopefully that then, if any problems come up in the future with disagreements over the plan, it's not just, let me call an attorney. It's like, I need to figure this out. We need to sit down and talk, or even with the help of a mediator again, or a therapist to talk through. But I feel like that is part of what we're doing is giving them that that this is how you're going to talk through problems together.
Sure.
With
Yeah, this is a tool.
Yeah.
You know, it's a piece of the puzzle as well. You know, and like I said earlier, that modeling is the most effective way that we teach our children how to be adults in the future. So I will often remind parents that it's really important to really to show effective communication, even if you're not together, you know, because they will then carry that out through their life, you know. So they'll be able to get through when they get yelled at by their boss or they don't get along with a coworker, you know.
Right. Yeah, it'll play out everywhere.
Yeah, if we think about when we're raising children, if we think, well, we're raising children, okay, you can think of it that way, but you can also think of, I'm raising a future adult, you know? And if parents can look at it that way, especially in the divorce process, that this child will one day be an adult, and how do I want them to interact with the world, you know, and other people? So do I want them to be kind to other people? If you do, then you want to model that.
Right.
So...
Well, great. I mean, I think that's a really good place to end, unless there are any other comments that you want to share having to do with children in divorce or your work as a parenting mediator. Anything else?
No, I just think that, you know, when I've done these parenting mediations, I think it's a very effective way for families to, despite going through that difficult time, to figure out a way to make a plan that works for their family. So that's all.
Good. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this first episode.
Thanks for having me.
Of Divorce Periscope with Alpha Center for Divorce Mediation. We are at Alpha Divorce for Twitter or for this account. Is that right? And you can find us at alpha-divorce.com. We have lots of amazing resources for people that are looking for articles, blog posts, some of them by you, about this topic. And we are kicking off this Periscope broadcast the first and third Wednesdays of every month at 7 to 8 p.m. or around that time. So we welcome you to join us. I think the next topic is on the 17th is going to be finances and divorce. So come back for that. I'm going to be your host again, Matt Pilisher. I'm an attorney and a mediator at the Alpha Center. And we'll have various guests on. So hopefully we'll have you come back and do this again.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.